Hey everybody, this is Harlan Kilstein, and I am the top dog at Dogington at Dogington Post. Our good friends at Merrick Pet Care are back, and they are sponsoring this series on dog health. Now, what you're going to learn in this series could very well save the life of your fur baby. You're going to hear information that is absolutely vital to you, and you're also going to be able to ask questions to the world's top experts regarding the topics that we're talking about and your health. So number one, I'd like to ask you for a favor, and that is if you are a friend of someone else who is a dog lover and has a dog and they care about their dog like a member of their family, would you be so kind as to tell them about this series and share with them that it's going on? They'll thank you for it. Next, sometimes our questions go on long and people have to drop off. I want you to know that we are recording each session and they will be made available to you. So if you're not following us on Facebook, go ahead and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Dogington Post. Now, our friends at Merrick, we're really thrilled to be working with them because they're the leader in the real pet food revolution, food that's worthy of a fork. Today, when I fed my puppy and I opened up the can of Merrick to give it to her, it smells just like the food that you would cook up at home. Real food for real furry friends. And we call that the power of the paw. So they make a variety of dry and wet dog foods. You can get them nationally at Petco or other independent specialty stores. All the recipes are made with USDA-inspected deboned meat as the first ingredient and the freshest produce. Now, one of the things that Merrick does that we love so much is they make this exciting. One participant on our call today will receive a free voucher for a 25-pound bag of the new grain-free real Texas beef dry dog food. And Merrick is also going to donate an additional bag in the winner's honor to the National Mill Dog Rescue. Now, the way we're going to pick the winner is we're going to ask you a question based on something that our speaker says in the course of his presentation. So pay attention. The first person to answer wins. Now, my experience says that you guys are so sharp and so on the ball that you've got to have your typing, we'll warn you, but your typing fingers better be in place because you got tough competition today. Now, we are honored to have with us today Dr. Ernie Ward. Dr. Ernie Ward started his veterinary clinic, Seaside Animal Care, in 1993, and his deepest passion is preventing illnesses in animals. Now, I'm sure just about everybody who's ever dealt with a vet knows that it's not a business, it's a life calling. And Dr. Ward is really become one of the foremost vets known in America today. He's been the featured vet on The Rachel Ray Show since 2007. He's been on Animal Planet, CMM, NBC's Nightly News, and Good Morning America. Now, specifically, Dr. Ernie is the author of Chow Hounds, Why Our Dogs Are Getting Fatter, and he's the founder of the Association for Pet Obesity Prevention. He's going to talk to us about the obesity epidemic. He's going to talk to us about what that means, and he's also going to talk to us about how we can keep our pups from packing on the pounds. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make him the presenter, and in just a moment he's going to share his screen with us, and away we go.
Well, thank you very much, Harlan. I appreciate that introduction, and I want to thank our sponsors here at Dogington Post as well as Merrick Pet Foods. And I do think that Merrick does a really fine job with their foods. It's one of the things that I recommend personally in my practice. I want to thank all of you for your attendance tonight. Obviously, your being here shows you have some interest in pet nutrition, maybe specifically how to shed some pounds from your pooch, and most importantly, how to provide for a better quality of life for our pet loved ones. And so I've been very, I'm honored to be asked to present and speak to you tonight virtually over the internet on behalf of the Association for Pet Obesity Prevention. And certainly, I know that many of you have questions about what should you be feeding your pet, how much should you feed your pet, when should you feed your pet, what about ingredients, exercise. And tonight, hopefully, we'll be able to handle a little bit of all of those types of things.
So what we'd like you to do is, before you get started, is if you have a question, you can go ahead and type it in on the side, and we will pick up your questions at the end. I will not be interrupting Dr. Ernie during the presentation. I'm going to let him talk without interruption, and then at the end we will come back to your questions. So, Dr. Ernie, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Harlan. And again, we'll have plenty of time to answer your questions when we're done. As was mentioned in the introduction, I had the good fortune to publish a book back in 2010 on the pet obesity epidemic. And as a veterinarian, I was seeing more and more portly pooches and fat cats. And I really was, concerned about this. And I wrote this book that is really geared both for the pet owner as well as the veterinarian, because I think many of us sometimes get frustrated. Our veterinarian doesn't talk to us about pet food. When they do, they have a very limited palette of brands perhaps that they're recommending, and we've got to do better. So this was sort of a call to action, if you will. And if you're interested in this book, you can buy it at all the major bookstores and certainly at Amazon.com. If I told you there was a disease affecting over half of the United States pets and that it was easily avoidable and it was costing us hundreds of millions of dollars, you would be concerned. And yet that's been the situation for the past decade, and we tend to be ignoring it. Currently, based on our 2012 national survey, 53% of U.S. dogs and 58% of the cats were classified as overweight or obese by their veterinarian. So this is a huge number. When we look at numbers, this is almost 80 million pets are at risk of developing some very serious conditions that we'll discuss later. And so when I first founded the association back in 2005, it was really set out on one simple purpose, and that was to raise the awareness, because I felt like we were ignoring this as a profession. We were really beginning to talk about this in terms of human nutrition and human health, but yet we were turning a blind eye to the millions upon millions of pets that were suffering the ravages of excess weight. So I founded the Association for Pet Obesity Prevention, and we've gone on to do some remarkable studies, some really interesting research, and even later this year we have some guidelines that we're working on with the American Animal Hospital Association. So I'm very, very, I'm happy that it's getting better. But let's talk a little bit about the association and what you can expect from us and why this is an important, organization, I think, to perhaps support. And we don't ask for money, we just ask for support. Since 2005, this has been a singular focus for me, certainly in my own personal practice, but also as a speaker and author. Really what we've done are surveys. We measure the prevalence of pet obesity in the United States, and we focus on dogs and cats, but we also have plans to expand this to horses, in which the horse epidemic obesity epidemic is really a very serious problem. We also set out to develop what I call parallel weight loss programs. And in addition to being a veterinarian, I'm also a certified personal trainer and a USA Triathlon accredited coach. So I'm one of the guys that I love endurance sports such as the Ironman and long distance swimming and paddling, but I also like helping people get in shape for a 5K. Recently, over the past 3 years, I've turned my attention towards the link between childhood and pet obesity, because certainly the drivers or factors that cause our pets to gain weight are identical to those that are plaguing our children. And as the father of two school-age children, I can tell you this is a very serious problem that our country must overcome quickly. from our mission statement, I thought I would read this just so you understand that we're a very autonomous, unique, neutral organization. And I'll just read here: we're made up of dedicated veterinarians and veterinary healthcare personnel who are committed to making the lives of dogs, cats, and all other animals and people healthier and more vital. The association is not affiliated with any veterinary industry corporation or business in any manner, and that's very important. This neutrality is critical to our ability to provide unbiased information and advice to veterinary healthcare providers and the pet-loving public. And one of the things that I think many times people are hesitant to accept certain advice from certain people because they feel maybe there's a corporate message or a hidden agenda. But one of the things I've really stood for strongly with the association is that we are not involved with any organization or any type of business. So let's look at what we do. The main thing we do is these surveys, and last year, of course, no different than the previous surveys, we find the pet obesity numbers continue to creep upwards. And let's kind of look at these numbers just in a little bit of detail before we move on to some of the issues and questions. But when we look at it, and this was done on about 2,000 pets, we found that about 29.3 million cats were classified as overweight, and about 14 million cats were classified as obese. And you have to remember, we in the medical community use overweight and obese to describe different conditions. So overweight is typically, we use something called the body condition scale, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, but we break out and we describe the different degrees of excess weight. And so overweight and obese, hopefully you can sort of get your head around that a little bit, and we'll go into some detail on that. About 25.7 million dogs were classified as overweight, and about 11 million of those were classified as obese. So this is a huge, huge problem in our country. One other thing, too, we look at different breeds, and certainly, I'm not here to go into detail on the statistics of this, but one of the breeds that jumped out in this year's survey just happened to be the most popular in the United States, and those were Labrador Retrievers. Sadly, Labrador Retrievers also had the highest incidence of obesity of any of the pure breeds that we surveyed. In fact, we found that almost 59% of the labs in the U.S. were classified as too heavy by their veterinarian. I'll repeat that. 59% of all labs were classified as too heavy. And that's a big problem because I love labs. I see them, and we see lots of osteoarthritic problems with the joints, tearing of the knee ligaments and so forth. Interestingly, of those pure breeds, the German Shepherds had the lowest instance of excess weight. In fact, they only had a 2.1% of obesity. So if you're going to get a dog, I guess it pays to have a German Shepherd. And we actually do survey people. If you've been involved, we ask you questions about your lifestyle, and German Shepherds tend to have that. So the first question that people ask me is my pet overweight? How do I know if my pet is overweight? And I often tell them that if you think your pet is overweight, it's overweight. If you feel that your pet may be carrying a couple of extra pounds, it's probably carrying more like 10 extra pounds. So the simple answer is, if you think it is, it is. But it's not that simple. In fact, there's a real problem with what I describe as the fat pet gap. The fat gap happens when you look at your dog or cat and say, oh, he's a healthy weight, he's a normal weight, when in reality that pet is obese. And when we measure our surveys, we find that that gap, this fat gap, continues to widen over time. Now, your veterinarian will do something called a body condition scoring, and that is how we determine if your dog or cat is a little too heavy. Now, unlike humans that are basically the same body shape and size, so the morphometrics of humans, we all are pretty much the same with the exceptions of some very small people and some very large people, we have a BMI scale, or body mass index, that gives you a pretty good indication of if you're healthy weight or not. You can also do a waist to hip ratio. You can do some different things. You can look at your height compared to your waist. You can do some things that would give you maybe a finer tune into if you're too heavy, but the BMI is what most people associate with. So the closest thing we have in veterinary medicine is the body condition scoring. And as you see here, we actually have two scales that are commonly used in the United States. They're actually more than that. When you talk about Europe, there's actually a 7-point scale. And sadly, those scales were formulated and created by pet food manufacturers. So it's something that I'm not really happy about. There really is no standard. I find that just as many veterinarians use the 9-point scale as the 5-point scale. I like the 5-point scale for simplicity's sake, but again, I don't care what scale you use, but I want us to sort of get some commonality. One of the things that has also been looked at recently in the literature, in the scientific literature, is the fact that we can break that out into the percentage body fat. So however you want to look at it, you can sort of draw some lines here, but basically up to about 30% excess weight is considered overweight, and above that is considered obese. So similar terminology that we use in humans. Now, one of the things that as we drive into, is your pet overweight, and if you think it's overweight, and I want us to answer one question, is why? Why are so many dogs overweight? And believe it or not, the first part of this question is limited to dogs. So let's now, you think your dog might be a little overweight. You go to your veterinarian, you say, Dr. Ward, can you tell me what my pet's weight should be? And they're going to do this thing called a body condition score, and sure enough, they say, gosh, Rover needs to lose a couple of pounds. He's a little heavy, or whatever the problem may be. So the reality is, why? And I think everybody tends to jump on one of two things. One, we're feeding too much. Two, we're exercising too little. And the sad reality is, it's probably a little bit of both, but one of those answers is probably wrong. Now, let's first of all look at the biggest excuse that I get. Dr. Ward, I don't have time to exercise my dog. I can't go running with him every evening like you do with your dogs. I'm busy, I have children. I mean, whatever excuses you want, that's fine. And so we tend to say, because I cannot exercise my dog, therefore it is overweight. The equation for weight loss or weight gain in humans and dogs is like this. It's about 60 to 70% what we eat or feed, and only 30 or 40% what we burn. Repeat that. 60, 70% of why you can't lose weight is your diet. It's only 30 or 40% your exercise. So when people come to me and they say, I can't exercise and lose weight personally, I can't run my dog and help it lose weight, I say, forget about it. Don't worry. No big deal. We've got 60 to 70% that we can create, change, adapt in the kitchen. So most of weight loss occurs for dogs at the bowl. Now, let's talk about what we're putting in that bowl. How many calories? And I find that most pet owners don't do two critical things, and that is, one, they don't know how many calories their dog should receive each day. And I'd like for you to ask yourself that question right now. Do you know? Do you have any idea? Or is it sort of a guess? It's about a cup and a half. Well, what is a cup and a half? Is that 425 calories? Is it 550 calories? Is it 375 calories? Because I can tell you a cup and a half could be any of those numbers I just described. So we don't know how many calories they should be getting. We don't even now go the next step and measure their food. Sadly, after surveying thousands and thousands of pet owners over the past 5 years, I have found that the majority of pet owners do not measure their pet's food each feeding. In fact, most of us just fill up the bowl, we kind of guesstimate it, we have a convenient tool that we use in our home, and we just sort of measure it out every day. And we don't take into account that day's extra treats. Maybe we shared something from the table. Maybe we didn't go for a walk because it was raining or snowing. So we don't do anything to adapt to the daily changes in caloric needs or expenditures. So why are so many dogs overweight? I'll tell you why, because we're not paying attention as pet parents. And that's part of what we're going to do tonight, and certainly when you're going to have a further conversation with your veterinarian. What about cats? Why are so many cats overweight? Because the problems that cats face are different than dogs. Dogs and cats are not the same. They are not the same species. They do not have the same medical problems, nor do they have the same solutions. In fact, some of the solutions in cats would never work in a dog, and some of the solutions for dogs would be deadly for a cat. So when I say, why are cats overweight, it's a different problem. And remember, we talked about humans and dogs. It's about 60 to 70% what we feed them, and only about 30 or 40% how many times or minutes we take them out for a walk. Well, for cats, it's different, and it's different because their physiology is different. It's different because the way they utilize energy, in fact, the energy systems that cats employ to move from point A to point B are different than humans and dogs. And so when we look at that same equation, it now becomes a very different picture. In fact, weight loss in cats is about 90% what we feed and only about 10% exercise. So when people blame a lazy cat for being fat, I say forget that. That's got very little to do with it. It's how much they are eating that is critical. Now, we could go into the physiology of this, and it would take some time, and it's what I enjoy speaking to veterinarians about. But the truth of the matter is that diet is the critical factor when it comes to losing weight for cats and maintaining a healthy weight. If your cat is overweight, it is not. I repeat, it is not because it is lazy. It is because it is simply eating too much, and that's our problem. Now, we'll go into later, is it carbohydrates, is it protein? And yes, it's all of that. But bottom line is calories. So why are so many cats overweight is a little different proposition than dogs. Because one of the things we're going to prescribe for dogs and weight loss is exercise. But for cats, it's important and it's a critical component, but it's not nearly as important as it is in dogs and in people. So what do we do about this? How can we help them lose weight? And each and every one of you, I charge you, if you hear these words, I want this to bug you and nag you and gnaw at you. I want you to say, are you measuring your pet's food each time you feed it? I want you to get out a measuring cup. Now, before that, of course, I want you to have a conversation with your veterinarian. How many calories should you be feeding? How many calories are in that bag or can of food? And that's where it even gets trickier, because currently the AAFCO, or the food regulations, do not require pet foods in America to tell you how many calories are in that cup or in that can. They'll require it. Now, AAFCO keeps promising us that they are going to make this mandatory, and currently it may be as early as 2015. Doesn't mean it will be in 2015, but they're saying it could be as soon as 2015 that we'll actually see this. Now, some of the better pet food manufacturers have already taken this into their own hands and said, we don't need AAFCO to tell us to do this. It's the right thing to do, and we are doing it now. So I tell people the first thing is, if I look on a bag or a can of pet food and I can't find the calorie content, that gives me pause. That gives me concern. So I want you to have the conversation. Is my dog or cat overweight? What's its body condition score? How many calories should I feed my pet to either help it lose weight or maintain a healthy weight? Then you're going to get a measuring cup and you're going to measure each time you feed. You're going to make sure that you adapt. So, wow, you know, you had a great salad and you gave your dog some extra sweet potato, which is a great thing to do, but maybe we've got to adjust a little bit the food that we're going to feed later that evening. And I don't want you to count calories. I don't want you to get bent out of shape over 10 calories here and there, but I want you to say, I gave something from the table to my dog, and therefore I'm going to reduce a little bit in the cup. So how can we help them lose weight? We take the simple measuring cup, most important tool you'll have. Second thing you're going to do is you're going to commit to exercising your dog every day. It is simply one of the minimum requirements for responsible pet ownership. Dogs need to be exercised. They thrive. In fact, when I deal with behavior problems, most of the questions revolve around initially, how much exercise and activity and physical interaction does your dog get? Because I find that most behavioral problems can be solved with aerobic activity. And a lot of people want to reach for the prescription pad. They want to give them the latest version of Prozac or the neat drugs that we have. But I'm going to say, let's get out there and exercise, because that does more to the brain chemistry than any drug or treatment I can prescribe. So we're going to get out there and we're going to exercise 30 minutes a day. 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening. For most dogs, that's going to be adequate. It's a brisk walk. It's a walk at which maybe you even break into a light sweat. And people, you know, I find I'm amazed when I give seminars and webinars, things like that. People will come to me and they will ask questions, how far and how fast can I take my dog? What if it's too hot or too cold? And I find those amusing because the reality is we're not doing anything very frequently or adequately. And I think that we look for those excuses. If it's too hot for you, it's too hot for your dog. But guess what? You can get up earlier. You can go out a little later. I mean, there's always that time and opportunity, and I just don't accept that as a valid excuse. Sure, if it's snowing outside and there are blizzards, sure, if it's 105 degrees, no, that's not a great time to go out for a walk. But there's probably another time. So how can we help them lose weight? We're going to simply measure their food. We're going to start to talk about exercise. What about cats? 3 5-minute play periods a day is all I'm asking. This can be a laser pointer or a remote control mouse. It can be a ball of paper that you wad up and throw around. I'm amazed at how many cats are engaged by simple acts. Putting boxes and bags around. You know, cats love to leap and prey. Tap into that predatory drive. But get them active just for a few minutes a day. That's really all they need. How much should you feed them? Well, these are the typical formulas that we give. The one on the top, the 70 times ideal body weight in kilograms to the 75th power, that's the one that we use. Now, for most pet parents out there, the bottom one is easier. We call that the linear equation. And this works great for dogs that are anywhere between 6 pounds to about 60 pounds. If your dog is 100 pounds, probably have to have a different equation. If your dog is a 4-pound teacup, probably have to have a different equation. But for most of you listening today, that's a good starting point. And, you know, people always say, well, what does that look like in reality? Well, let's kind of look here in a book. I'll just give you some figures here. Let's say you have a dog that is roughly 40 pounds. Well, that means that your dog probably needs somewhere between 615 and 750 calories a day. It's not that many calories. And that's what I think is so amazing. People just have no concept that that's a couple of cups a day. But what about treats? Many people know that in fact, I've been called in the media the treat czar, the pet treat czar. And I'm not anti-treats, I'm anti-junk food. And there's a huge distinction and difference. And I think we have to make sure that we are clear. You know, I love treats. I give my human family treats. I like treats. Give my dogs and cats treats. But they maybe aren't the same treats that you're given if you break open a chocolate bar or you get a handful of cookies. Maybe our treats are fruits and vegetables. Maybe for our cats, it's a flake of salmon or tuna. Maybe these are single ingredient, more natural, wholesome, fortifying foods. So yes, I believe in treats. Yes, I encourage you to use treats. They're an important part of the relationship we have with each other and our pet loved ones. But I want us to be sensible about it and make those nutritious choices whenever possible. Now, one of the things about treats is, and this goes back to 2010, and this was an expose I did that was then picked up by Nightline. We did a very interesting episode. You can find it online. But that is the addition of sugar to dog treats. It's alarming. It's quite alarming. In fact, if you go back and you look online at some of the things that I published and some of the things that we presented on the Nightline episode, these aren't small amounts, and it's no different than the sugar in cereals of children. And so I want you to be aware that if you're eating some of these chewy treats out there, some of these things that look really enticing and maybe your dog would be begging for them, maybe there's added sugar that could be harmful. And if at best it's just giving extra calories. So think about that. Again, getting back to the exercise topic, I mean, I love it. I love running with my dogs. I love going for long hikes with my two dogs. I love playing with my cats in the evenings. But the reality is, if you're somehow limited in your abilities, it's not the end of the world. You want to exercise your dog and your cat for health reasons, not just to maintain a certain weight. Too often we make exercise about vanity, and I think that's one of the stigmas that is applied to humans, because many times as a personal trainer, people are coming to me to learn how to exercise and do certain movements so that they can look a certain way instead of maybe feel a certain way. Or maybe they're trying to, be more healthy. I mean, these are the things, not the bikini, don't chase a number on a scale. I want you to exercise your dog because it's going to make them happier, healthier, and more disease-free. I have this saying in my practice, I want every person to be emergency room ready. And the best way you can do that is to be as fit and healthy as possible. And you just can't do it without aerobic activity every day. So get out there, 30 minutes, not a big deal. What are the consequences? So what if your dog or cat's a couple extra pounds, right? Big deal. Very big deal, in fact. In fact, if your dog or cat is even a few pounds overweight, its life expectancy can be reduced by up to 2.5 years. That's not my study. That's a lifelong study of Labradors in which they fed one group the quote-unquote normal amount of calories, and they restricted the other group by 25%. The dogs that were fed less food over their lifetime not only lived an average of 2.5 years longer, but more importantly, they had fewer diseases like cancer and arthritis. Type 2 diabetes is of epidemic proportions in both humans and in cats in our country. It's one of the most common diagnoses I make in my clinic. And it breaks my heart because there's not a single cat that's been born on this planet that was born with type 2 diabetes. We gave them that at the food bowl. Now, I want you to think about that. You're not born with type 2 diabetes, you create it. And you create it by poor feeding practices. What about high blood pressure? When I graduated from veterinary school over 20 years ago, high blood pressure was a footnote in a subsection of some notes that we didn't even get to in class. And today, hypertension, high blood pressure, is one of the more common conditions I see, and it leads to serious consequences like kidney failure, sudden blindness. It may even be leading to types of brain and dementia. So these are issues that I want us to take seriously. Osteoarthritis is the #1 condition diagnosed in dogs. In fact, Americans will spend almost $2 billion repairing broken knees in this country this year, and the vast majority of those are related to excess weight. So what are the consequences? The consequences are the same diseases that we see in humans, including now an emerging body of evidence that cancer, many cancers are related to excess fat. So the consequences to me are pretty stiff. Now, you may sit there and say, wow, I don't really care about any of that. Well, let me tell you one thing that most pet parents do care about, and that's cost. And so when I work with these different pet insurance companies, I'll tell you, one of the things they keep coming to me for is they say, Ernie, we've got to do something about obesity because it is breaking the bank. Just like it is in humans, when we diagnose conditions such as type 2 diabetes and osteoarthritis, these aren't things we fix and they go away. We give them a pill, you're done. These are things that they maintain the rest of their life, which wind up costing a lot of money, which wind up causing a lot of problems. So if for no other reason, think about the economics of it. Now, I'm worried as a veterinarian about the pain and suffering, the decreased longevity, the avoidance of disease. But maybe for some people, it's just, gosh, it costs a lot more money to have a fat pet. If you go to our website, there's certainly lots of tools, and I think one of the things that we see from our Google Analytics is a lot of people go there to find out calorie content. So if you go and look under all these different dry dog food, can, pouch, all these things, you can find out probably the type of food you're feeding and the current calorie count. So that's something that we do, again, as a service, no charge, nothing. We also have a lot of cool tools like the Pet to Human Weight Translator, where you basically put in your own height, and it tells you what your normal weight should be, and you can actually put in your weight and do it reverse, and it tells you what, if your pet was you, how much it should weigh or how much it would weigh. And that, of course, depends on if you're too heavy or if your pet is the right amount. So that's a nice, fun thing. You also notice that we have all of these charts. So if you go and if you have a female Great Dane and you're curious as to know what would if my dog were a person, what would it kind of look like? It gives you a good picture. And again, I'm trying to create stories that pet owners can relate to, that they can actually say, I get it now. My cat is like a 350-pound man. So if this were me, I would have to weigh 350 pounds. I'm just trying to do anything I can to help you understand the seriousness of the situation. We have all kinds of handouts and charts and things like that. Some are for your veterinarian. Some you may want to take to your veterinarian, like the STEP weight loss program. Say, hey, vet, help me out here. And this will help guide your vet through the proper way and safe way and effective way to lose weight. Certainly in our book, we go through lots of these things as well. In closing here, before we get to questions, I want to leave you with a quote that I did for a recent media. This is a war veterinarians, pet owners, and parents must win. Obesity is the #1 preventable medical condition seen in veterinary hospitals today and is the fastest growing health threat of our nation's children. The most important decision a pet owner makes each day is what they choose to feed their pet. Choose wisely. Your pet's life depends on it. So, if you have questions or whatever, certainly you can hit me up on Facebook there, website, you can go to petobesityprevention.org. That's me with a couple of my dogs running here recently down the beach. We live on the North Carolina coast where we're preparing for Andrea, who has knocked our kids out of their last day of school tomorrow, so we're none too happy about that. The makeup day is Monday, which is a drag. But it was a real pleasure here presenting briefly some of this information. I'd love to spend more time, of course, answering questions, and I think I've got about 25 minutes or so that I can take questions tonight. So Harlan, I'll turn it back over to you, and you can tell me how to answer questions.
Well, first of all, number one is I was just blown away by your presentation. Um, I'm blown away with the presentation because number one, how much it struck home. I have a little Pomeranian, Kalba, who is munching on a bone right underneath my feet right now, and uh, the vet tells me that she's overweight. And so I'm listening, and so tell me, other than the scale, what are we going to notice as the early signs of obesity? How are we going to know that it's become from the cute dog that or cat that begs for food to you have a serious problem?
Right, and Pomeranians are a tricky breed because number one, they have so much fur, they conceal that excess fat pad that they're carrying around their abdomen. The average Pomeranian should weigh around 4 to 7 pounds. So I typically will see these Poms that come in double digits. They're 10, 12, maybe even more. And that's a real issue because the owner doesn't perceive it at all. Now, a couple of quick things too. I mean, I mentioned if you think your pet's carrying a couple extra pounds, it's probably carrying about 10. But the reality is, look at them from the side. If their stomach sort of sags down, if it doesn't tuck up and actually go back upwards towards the hips, then they're carrying too much abdominal fat, which is the worst type of fat ever. If you can't feel your dog's ribs easily under just a small amount of fat, then again, they're carrying too much fat. If you look at them from above and they don't have a nice little indentation like an hourglass, then again, they're carrying too much fat. But I think part of your question also says, okay, look, they're just begging and it's kind of cute behavior. When does it turn bad? The problem is it turns bad when it turns awful. And you don't know that there's a problem until they wind up blowing out their knee or developing osteoarthritis or type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure. And at that point, it's too late. The damage has been done. And that's why it's so paramount that you have this conversation regularly with your veterinarian. What should you be feeding? How much should you be feeding? Exercise? Is it the normal weight? And if your vet's not asking or telling you, then you need to find another vet, quite frankly, because this is the most important thing that you will discuss with your vet in terms of preventive care. So there's no way to tell if you're almost there. There's really not there's not a safe amount of extra weight you can carry around. I mean, we make in humans there's considerable debate, like, is there this protective level? And maybe there is, but the reality is it's probably 5 to 10 pounds extra. That's about it. Now, when you start looking at a human that's 20 pounds overweight, we know from the inflammatory biomarkers that we can measure in your blood, it's too much. So at 5 pounds, you're seeing them, but maybe not to the degree at 20 pounds. So we're starting to infer that there definitely is a gradation or an increase in your risk as you gain more and more weight. Where the cutoff is in humans is debatable. We don't really know where that is. And the reason I mention that is because we don't have a clue in dogs and cats. None of this research is being done. All we know is that, gosh, when dogs and cats seem to be just 2 or 3 pounds overweight, bad things happen. And remember, you're looking at a cat that the average domestic cat in the United States should weigh between 8 and 10 pounds. So now when they're at 13 pounds, they are classified as obese. And we know from the physiology, the biomarkers that we do evaluate in cats, that 13, 15 pounds, that's when really bad things are happening. And again, you don't see it until it's too late. These are chronic inflammatory states. These are chronic changes, chemicals that are and hormones that are being produced by this fat that when they finally cause the disease, it's too late.
Okay. So, over the years, especially in recent years, the pet food manufacturers, I think, have become a lot more conscious of what's going into the pet foods that we're feeding our fur babies. And they're paying a lot of attention to quality and where it comes from. And certainly when you have a company like Merrick, it's like mama's cooking. But overall, do you see a shift from cereals to meat, and how much of a factor is that a lot of people who are paying attention to how much their pet food costs are giving their dogs filler? How much of a factor is that?
Yeah, Harlan, I wish I could share your optimism. I don't. For every good pet food that's out there, there's about two that I find to be very suspect. And the problem is you can't really measure this in terms of does it meet the minimum requirements for life, which is really what we look at. We just measure these pet foods and say, does it meet the requirements to sustain minimal life? That is, avoid major diseases. And I'll tell you, the health continuum isn't just you're sick and in the hospital or you're well. There are gradations or levels of being healthy, and you want to strive for optimal health in your own. I mean, this is why you can't subsist at a high level on a crappy diet. I mean, you know that you eat certain things and you feel a certain way, and you clean, and boy, you have energy, and you're focused and so forth. So the bottom line here is that I wish that every pet food manufacturer was as good, but they're not. And so I think you've got to, as a pet parent, really closely and skeptically critique what you're feeding. And I would say, first and foremost, do not trust the bag. The bag is the basic form of marketing. It is designed to make you do an impulse. They like pretty pictures, they like catchy slogans, and I'm going to say big whoopity whoopah. I want to know what's in that bag, and more importantly, how did it get in that bag? And even more importantly, before that, why did you put that in that bag? And so this requires a little bit of due diligence. And so often people, pet parents, media people, they say, so Dr. Ward, what's the best pet food out there? Well, that's going to be dependent on your own lifestyle and beliefs. For me, as a vegetarian, I have a different diet than you do, perhaps, if you eat meats. It doesn't mean one is healthy or not. In fact, both can be junk food. You can eat junk food and be a vegetarian, and junk food and be a carnivore. But the reality is, I want you to go deeper and to look at that and really critically evaluate. And I don't think enough pet parents ever call or email their pet food manufacturer. And if more of us did that, they would really start to pay attention, because what pet food manufacturers do respond to is where you spend your money. And that's why you've seen this migration towards all of these things that claim to be all natural and organic and holistic or whatever. When they put those terms on the label, it sells. And so you've seen a migration of pet foods that have now incorporated that. And I'll tell you, they're not all created equally. You've got to really trust that manufacturer. There's some foods out there that I really believe in and feel strongly about, and then there are some that I just wouldn't feed my dog unless it was the last thing on the planet Earth and the zombie apocalypse had already happened.
Boy, you should see the excitement when we wrote about a major dog food that's in all of the big box stores and talked about, the pets dying in front of it. It did not earn us a lot of friends. But going to our questions now, Cindy wants to know, when you're on a tight budget, what's the best food to feed your dog that doesn't cost a lot?
Back to that question, and Cindy, you're going to have to look at a wide variety of things. Number one, how old is your dog? Is it a male or female, spayed or neutered? How active is it? Does it have any current conditions that would maybe indicate we need less salt or more protein? So all of those things, you've got to have that conversation with your veterinarian. And if your veterinarian is not willing or able to answer those questions, you've got to find a vet who has an interest in nutrition. So while I wish I could offer you an answer that says, oh yes, you should just feed brand X, it's the best, that isn't the truth, and it never will be the truth. So you've got to look at all of those factors and then decide what works best for you. I will say that there is a weak linkage between cost and quality, and I say weak linkage because there are some foods that are really expensive that I don't get it. I don't get why they're so expensive. The quality of ingredients, the ingredient profile, it just doesn't impress me very much. And then there are some mid-range foods that I think are real values. So I think that go to that next level, talk to your veterinarian. This is something that if you do not have a very good trusting relationship with a veterinarian, you're missing out, because it is the most valuable relationship you will have in terms of keeping your pet healthy. So you got to, you can certainly find it. If you were my client, there are lots of brands that we could find within your price point that would work for you, and so you got to get out there. And I wish I could offer a blanket recommendation, but we live in a country, fortunately, with lots of choices, and with lots of choices, that means that I don't have a simple answer.
Okay, Beth, who follows every single one of our webinars, says my 17-month-old Texas Healer pup was starting to look quite heavy, so I have since then been cutting down on his food, but he's still not losing any weight. Why and what can I do to help him? I'm very concerned. My dog is being fed organic, non-GMO dog food, so the type of the food isn't the problem, and he's very active. Please help.
Right. Well, and this is simple thing. You're in excess energy balance is what we would call it as nutritionists. And the reality is, if your dog is gaining weight and your dog is beyond the normal growth period, I think you said 17 months and a healer, I believe. So we're pretty much at skeletal maturity, and muscular development is pretty much where it's going to be as far as peak within reason. You're still feeding too much. So somewhere you're getting excess calories. And what you'll need to talk to your veterinarian, run some basic calculations. I mean, looking at actual activity levels, I find very interesting. People tend to overestimate their own activity as well as those of their pets. So whenever people say they're active, we need to be more specific. Active in terms of what? What's your pace when you walk? How far do you walk? How many miles and how long? Because those are all critical. Most dogs at 4 miles per hour, or a 15-minute mile, which is pretty rapid pace for most people. That's a brisk walk or a slow jog. That dog is only burning about 1.1 kcals per kilogram per kilometer, so half a mile. So the caloric expenditure of dogs, they're very efficient. In fact, in terms of efficiency, they are right there with us as far as movement and burning calories. So a long way around that question is, if your dog's gaining weight and it shouldn't be, you're simply feeding too much. In your situation, maybe it's just a simple downward adaptation. You feed a little less, or maybe you exercise a little bit more, but you've got to talk to your vet and say, what's the right number? Because I'm sensing we don't know the right number. We got the right food, and we've got some good ideas, but if your dog is continuing to gain weight, then you're feeding too much. It's that simple.
Okay, that's a terrific answer. Let's see. Okay, can you discuss more about food needs in athletic dogs, importance of fats versus carbs?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, my thing is weight loss, because very few dogs are actually, termed as athletes. But when I do work with some of the hunting dogs, retrievers and even some agility dogs, so forth, those guys have different needs. When you look at certainly the literature, what you find is that more calories from fat in general is the recommendation. When you get into deeper things, then I want to find out exactly the duration of the activity, the intensity level, because that's going to determine, if I'm using medium chain fats, if I'm going to be using maybe some carbohydrates just before, if I'm going to be using proteins after, which I think is a great idea always for recovery. But the reality is, in a general sense, more calories from fat, especially leading up to your event or competition. If you're training, 4, 5, 6 days a week, then what I'm going to typically have my athletic dogs on is a higher fat diet. And of course, that makes perfect sense for you out there. They tend to be extremely efficient at this. I do avoid a lot of the simple sugars and the carbs. There's some interesting research out there, and I'll say there's no consensus on it, but there are certain events, certain conditions and times where putting them on a higher glycemic food or supplement would make sense. So if we're trying to do certain high intensity bursts, I may want to use a more simplified form of sugar for them. But generally, higher fat, much better for you, for the dog in that situation.
Wow, that was not what I expected to hear. My Yorkie, says Patricia, has skin problems. How's that related to food, and will this help her?
Probably almost exclusively related to food. In fact, one of the issues with chronic atopy allergies is that there's often a food component to it. And there's two parts of that equation that and this is my opinion, so I'm now going to stray back into my, personal practice beliefs. The first thing is there actually an antigenic component or problem with the food? So maybe there's a component of that food that your dog has a sensitivity to. It could be wheat gluten, it could be soy, I don't know, right? There's something in that food perhaps that is triggering a response. The second thing, though, is the therapeutic components. And I want you to make sure that you're feeding, a larger component of the omega-3 fatty acids. And I would prefer that source to be either from an algal source of omega-3s, or from a fish oil source. So at minimum, when I have a case of chronic skin problems, allergies, we're going to really boost the omega-3 fatty acids. Now, there's a few other things that I may interject in there as well, but in general terms, I definitely want to boost that. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm probably going to start to do some exclusions. And so when I deal with these chronic allergies, I will start to say, let's try to go to a lower no-grain diet. Let's really try to now get a novel protein source. Let's start to look at the components of the food that you're currently feeding, and let's back away from it till we find as clean a diet as possible. And this often leads my patients down the path of home-prepared meals, especially if the condition warrants it. If it's a serious enough problem, you're probably going to have to go along with me on a few recipes, and we're going to work together. But here's what I want you to do. Look at the diet. If you're seeing wheat and wheat gluten, if there's a lot of grains, I'm probably going to say, first of all, let's back off of that. Second thing you're going to do is boost the omega-3s either through an algal supplement or a fish oil supplement. And again, your veterinarian can give you the proper dosage based on your pet's condition.
Okay. So Katrina says that she measures the food that she gives her dog on a kitchen scale, not a cup. Is that a good idea?
That's a great idea. I mean, measuring by weight is very accurate as long as you've equated that to the number of calories. So as long as you're doing that, that's perfect. It's an extra step. I will say that when we're doing studies, that's how we do it, because the food is measured by, it's by mass, by weight, not by volume. That's more accurate, but for most pet parents out there, I don't want you to think you've got to go break out the scales. I want you to break out a measuring cup, a simple measuring cup. But for those of you that are really interested, absolutely, I will calculate it up per, how many grams you need to be feeding your dog.
Susie writes that she stuffs a Kong toy with a blended mix of pumpkin, green beans, and mackerel or sardines. What do you think?
Oh, I love it. Absolutely love it. All those ingredients are almost superfoods, with the exception of the green beans. The main thing you want to do there is make sure now you are adjusting what you're feeding in terms of regular food or whatever you're feeding when you give that. We actually do something similar with my dog, so I love what you're thinking. I love sweet potatoes. I mean, if you hear anything out there, number one, I'm a big fan or proponent and advocate of whole foods whenever possible. So what you've just said absolutely makes me very, very happy. The main thing where people make a mistake, in fact, I just had a client this week. She was listening to my advice finally and giving sweet potato to her dog on a daily basis. However, she was not adjusting the pet food as I had recommended. So now we gained 1.5 pounds, and she's like, But the reality is it's a very simple adjustment, but I love it. I'd much rather, and I told her, I said, if you're going to do anything every day, it's give the sweet potato, cut the food, give the sweet potato, because we know that she's feeding plenty of the commercial prepared diet, that whole sweet potato, good stuff.
Okay, fantastic. Here's an unusual question. Melissa from California wants to know, what do you do if your vet doesn't know how many calories your dog should eat?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's time to find another vet. And I am a veterinarian, so I feel comfortable saying that. If my colleagues choose to ignore the most important decision that our patients and clients make each day, then we've got to figure out a different line of work. It is just too simple of a calculation to begin with. And what I find, and without derailing this because I don't have time and I'd love to come back and talk about this one time, is I find that veterinarians we don't have a great base in nutrition. In fact, much of it was perhaps biased by a pet food manufacturer in school. So we've got to go out there and dig a little deeper. We've got to do this on our own. And so maybe we're too busy or have other interests. We prefer to learn about surgery or liver disease or whatever, and that's fine. But the reality is, when I'm advising students, when I'm lecturing to students, I say, look, there's 2 areas that you must be proficient in if you are going to succeed and serve. Number 1 is nutrition. The number 1 question every pet parent should have answered before they leave me is, what should I be feeding my pet? Pretty simple. The second thing is behavior, and that is, how is your dog or cat behaving? If you just tackle those 2 things, we provide preventive care. I mean, think about it. I'm going to deal with more behavior cases in a 20-year career than I am with kidney failure. And people that think otherwise just aren't looking at the statistics, or they're burying their head in the sand. So getting back to your question, if your vet isn't even prepared to give you the number of calories, I'm going to be suspicious. How are they going to manage liver failure, kidney failure? What if your dog has an eye injury? And again, as a veterinarian, I feel like I am qualified to make that type of statement. And it's not a pleasant statement to make, but I am demanding of my profession.
We have some of the best and smartest questioners on this call. Susan wants to know, how many calories do soup bones or marrow bones add to a diet? She likes these because they give much longer chewing time than bully sticks.
And without more information, I can't give you that. In fact, it would be almost impossible without really looking at the cut, so I don't have enough information to answer that question. Chances are it's not as many, but I've seen some of these cuts that can be 100 calories. So I would say the size, the cut is very important. How it was prepared and processed is also a critical part of how many calories are retained in terms of fat, for example. So wish I could give you a specific answer, but it's probably okay, but we've got to be careful. And remember, the bottom line is this: if your pet is gaining weight, it's in an energy positive situation, then whatever you're doing needs to be adjusted. If your pet is maintaining a healthy weight, I am not going to tell you to change a thing unless I feel there's going to be a health benefit. For example, if you were feeding a really inferior food and your dog was a perfect weight, then I might step in as a veterinarian and say, hey, this food seems to be doing an okay job with maintaining the weight, but is it supporting the immune system optimally? Now that would be perhaps a little bit of a push there, but that's how I would look at it. But if you're doing things like that, which I'm suspicious by your tone of your question, you're doing a lot of good, healthy, whole food things, I'm not going to get you to change. So,
gosh, the questions. My vet said no people food ever, only dog food and dog treats. What's wrong with chicken and vegetables? Susan wants to know.
Yeah, that's baloney. That's a baloney answer, and I'll tell you, it's been perpetrated by the pet food manufacturers largely. I don't quite get this whole thing. If you look back 50 years ago, we weren't feeding from a bag or a can. I mean, this is a post-World War II industry by and large. And so, when I hear things like people foods are bad for pets, I don't get it. It makes no sense to me from a nutritional standpoint. Now, then if you want to argue that, well, if they're already feeding a commercial pet food and then they start adding the table scraps on, yes, you may create a positive energy balance situation and the pet's going to gain weight. That's a different issue altogether, but this whole thing about avoiding real, whole, nutritious foods, I'm against it. In fact, in my book and in my practice, I've been for the past 15 years, I've advised my clients to feed as this. We call it the hybrid menu, and that is 2 or 3 days out of the week, you feed from a bag or a can. You're busy with soccer on Tuesday night. You've got church or whatever, so on the nights that you're busy, you feed it in the most convenient fashion possible. You get the best food you can, but you feed it. Then 2 or 3 nights out of the week, you feed it a home-prepared meal. You're able to get those real whole foods, those simple ingredients, those nutritious foods, and that way you get the best of both worlds. And I find that then when veterinarians they say, oh gosh, I'm worried about is he getting enough selenium and trace minerals? Well, that's in the bag or the can, so you don't worry about that. And you get the other side of the vet saying, gosh, you're not getting enough whole, nourishing foods. Well, we got that too. So try to blend it together. But this whole belief about people foods are bad for pets, it's a myth, and it's time we stop saying that.
Okay, I have a last question. It's different. And Kat wants to know, she can feel her dog's ribs and hip bones very easily. Can he be too thin?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly we do deal with the opposite end of the spectrum, and those are dogs that have a BCS of less than 3. I would say those are more rare in this country. In fact, if you're down in South America, and I was recently in Asia, yes, I will see much more, clinically underweight dogs. What you've just described sounds pretty normal. In fact, it probably is like me. I mean, so I think this is part of that fat gap as well. That when people see my dogs running, if you look, I don't know if the picture's still up on the screen, but Sandy is the dog who is to my left.
It's still up.
yeah, is to the right of the screen, sort of this lab mix. We call her a beach mutt. I mean, you can see her ribs prominently, and and I know that people look at me sometimes thinking, "Wow, is she too thin?" But she is in fantastic shape. She is a great endurance runner. So I think that sometimes what we see as too thin also is just right. As a triathlete, particularly, I enjoy doing the ultra endurance, like the Ironman distance. I know that many people sometimes see us and they think, gosh, who are those skinny guys, skinny gals? And the reality is my BMI right now is 21.5, which is perfect. So, I think sometimes we think it's too thin. It's really not. Chances are your dog is A-OK. I have, in 21 years, have seen very few clinically underweight dogs, except for in terms of abuse and neglect.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put my screen back up. And now you're going to see just what kind of an audience we have, because we're going to ask a question. And guys, get ready, because whoever answers this question correctly wins the prize from Merrick. So here we go. I know you guys are going to get this one. How many minutes of exercise per day should we exercise our dogs? Holy cow, how did you do that? How did you do? Whoa. I didn't even, they're waiting for me. Denise Williams, you are our winner. I didn't even finish talking. Holy cow. That was fast. You guys in the future, this is like at the blink of an eye. Denise, if you would send us an email at info@dogingtonpost.com with your name and address, the good folks at Merrick will send you a voucher for a 25-pound bag of Merrick's new grain-free real Texas beef dry dog food. I'll be meeting my friends at Merrick when I go out to the big dog show, Super Zoo, in Las Vegas. It was really nice of them to switch the show from the fall, when it starts to cool off in Vegas, to the middle of the summer when it's 120 degrees in the shade. I'm really looking forward to that. Go ahead and join with Merrick on their Facebook page at facebook.com, Merrick Pet Care. Dr. Ward, I want you to know something, that since we started this call, not a single person dropped off the call. That gives an indication of just how much they appreciate what you taught us today, and your presentation and riveting style. They vote you a star. So I just want to really thank you for being here, and all of you guys for coming. The replay will be made available to you. Share this with your friends. This recording could save a dog's life. Dr. Ward, thank you. This was fantastic.
Thank you, and thanks for helping start the revolution. It's time.
Good night, everybody. We'll be back with you soon. Bye.